So coming up next Tuesday is going to be week number 4 of the Contender Series for 2024, and I think so far we've got a pretty good season. We've got a lot of contracts handed out, we've got a lot of finishes, we've got a lot of great fights as well, and I think that that doesn't stop with this card. I think that this is also going to be a very good card to watch as well. Now, I do think that this is going to be one where we could see 5 fighters signed for the first time this season. So far, we've only seen 4 out of 5 winners signed for every fight card so far. I think that this is kind of where we start to see all 5 get signed. I'm expecting finishes in most of the fights. I'm expecting really good fights out of most of the fights as well. And I do think that this is going to be a good one. I do want to say this though, I will be a little bit later on my predictions for week number 5 because I am going overseas to visit, well, my dad, who's working overseas at the moment, so I won't be back until the weekend next week, and then I'll record and upload the videos. But even then, I think it will still be up before the card, like 48 hours before the card next week, I think. So that's just kind of where I'm at with week number 5. Of course, I will run an article for We Win Picks though, and that is the $10 per month membership, but you can get a 3-day free trial signing up using my code ARTON. I'm a little bit late this week as well. To be honest with you, I haven't really been all that busy. It's just the fact that unfortunately Austin Bashi versus Tommy McMillan was cancelled yesterday, and that's when I typically upload these videos, so I had to wait a day to upload the prediction video, of course, because I was waiting for them to officially announce his new opponent. And another one as well is I'm not going to be first this week, so shout out to 138 MMA. He beat me this week, I believe, by over 24 hours, putting out his predictions pretty early, so he's done pretty well there. With all of that being said, though, I'll see you guys in the predictions. So starting off the card is going to be Quillan Salkilld fighting against Gage Young at lightweight, and this is a bit of an interesting one because the odds makers delayed putting out the odds for this fight for quite a while. I believe over 24 hours after all other 4 fights got odds announced. Quillan Salkilld versus Gage Young's odds didn't drop until about 24 hours later, and I thought that that was because they just didn't know how to line the fight, and they were eventually just going to drop the fight at minus 110 either way. And that wasn't the case at all. They released the odds and Quillan Salkilld has opened as a minus 220 favourite, which is pretty wide. Now, I am going to put it out there. I am going to pick Quillan Salkilld to win the fight, but I thought that it was a little bit wide because I do think that both of these guys are going to match up very interestingly in a way that I feel like both of their strengths are their opponent's weaknesses. For Quillan Salkilld, he is 6 foot tall for 155 pounds, so he is going to be a lot taller in this matchup. And he does box very well from range. He is mostly a boxer on the feet, throws a lot of straight shots, throws in combinations, and also does have pretty good counter boxing, and has shown that he does have one-punch knockout power, because in about, like 40 seconds, I believe he knocks out Blake Donnelly with a counter, and that was it. That was the fight. Now, the best part of his game, though, is not his striking. I think the best part of his game is actually his grappling, and his pure grappling is very good. He's always hunting for submissions, whether or not that's when he's on his back, whether or not that's on top. He's always going to be trying to find a submission in no matter what position he is put in. Now, I do think that his biggest weakness is actually Gage Young's biggest strength, and that's the weakness, and that's the wrestling. Sorry. I think that Quillan Salkild's wrestling isn't his best part of his game at all, and I don't think that his takedown defense is very good either, but I do think that if that's something that he worked on, I think he would be a much more effective fighter to see. Now, taking on Gage Young is really only a wrestler, I would say. He's kind of interesting to watch because he doesn't look that big, even though he hasn't fought at 155 pounds since 2022. I believe he's been fighting at like 165 pounds, 175 pounds, these kind of catchweight bouts against short notice opponents, so not really through any fault of his own. But what he does do is, on the feet, I don't think he's the most technical striker in the world, but he does have a lot of power. He's got a big overhand right, which I've seen him knock people out with. He's also got one-punch power, which he knocked out Manny Muro with one punch in that matchup. But what he does so well is he gets a takedown and he just lands vicious ground and pound. And that really could be a pretty good sort of way to defeat Quillan Salkilld, because Quillan Salkilld in his matchup against Don Marfan, which is his most recent fight, Don Marfan was able to take him down instantly into that fight and really was able to control about 3 minutes of that first round. Gage Young, I think, can probably do the same thing. I do think that Gage Young can get takedowns on Salkilld, but the thing is, when it gets down to the ground, I don't think that Gage Young has really fought someone that's going to be throwing up submissions and being so like aggressive off the back, aside from this one loss to Bobby Lee. And that Bobby Lee loss is a bit interesting because you can't actually really find it anywhere. You can't see it on YouTube like a lot of Gage Young fights. UFC Fight Pass also has a couple Gage Young fights, a bit of his older fights, and you can't find them. However, on Bobby Lee's Instagram, if you scroll through, you can find Instagram Reels where Bobby Lee has actually uploaded highlights of that fight. And from what it looks like, it seemed like Bobby Lee was getting taken down, but he was able to reverse the positions against Young, and eventually Young gassed out in the third round and Lee was able to lock up the armbar, because when you do see the finish, it looked like Young was very visibly tired. And I do think that is definitely something to note, because I do worry a little bit about the cardio of Gage Young. You know, he did gas out a bit in that Lee fight, but even at the end of round 1 against Manny Muro, although he did really dominate the fight, he did still start to breathe pretty heavily on the stool. And Quillan Salkilld has gone 5 rounds before, with 5 rounds with Brett Pastor at 155 pounds, which I think is worth noting because Gage Young hasn't had to cut to 155 pounds for a fight since 2022. But overall, I think that each fighter's weaknesses and strengths do kind of match up quite well, because I do think that Quillan Salkilld is the better striker out of the two. I do think that he's more technical out of the two, even though I think that Gage Young, if he lands a shot, is probably more likely to find the knockout on the feet. And I do think that Gage Young has much better wrestling, but I like Quillan Salkild's grappling, and I do think that just kind of overall, he is better in more areas of the fight, and I think that he has more ways to win as well, because Salkilld has shown that he can get a knockout on the feet, and he has shown that he can grapple on the ground as well. So that is my pick. I am going to be going with Quillan Salkilld to find a very late finish. I think that there's a very good chance that Gage Young goes out there and wins the first round, gets the takedown, Salkilld isn't able to reverse it, but he's throwing up submissions, and then after that, maybe Young's a little bit more tired than Salkilld, and Salkilld can maybe start to take over with his own grappling, and that's how I see the fight going. I am going to predict Quillan Salkilld to win by late submission in this matchup, but I do think that Gage Young has been a little bit overlooked by the odds makers and also the Tapology voters, but that is the pick, Salkilld to win with somewhat low to medium confidence, I would say. And now we have kind of like the most interesting decision so far, I would say, to have Yuneisy Duben on the Contender Series, because she is 4-0, but she is 4-0 against opponents that have never fought before. And this is the perks of Tapology, Angelo. You can look at the opponents here, and Yuneisy Duben has never fought anyone with any experience as a professional. All of her opponents have had no fights, and I believe multiple of these opponents have never won a fight. She fell to 0-1, and this Regina Casana girl is 0-3, and I believe Andrea Velasquez is now 0-4. So these wins have not aged very well at all, and if you do watch the fights, it does kind of look like her opponents don't have that experience at all. And I think it's actually especially obvious in her most recent fight, which is her only fight in the last 4.5 years or so, against Ingrid Garcia. It looked like Ingrid Garcia didn't really know what she was doing, and Ingrid Garcia was actually able to get a takedown against Yuneisy Duben. But to talk a little bit positively about Duben, she does have a wushu kung fu background as well as taekwondo. If you go to her Instagram, it looks like she's won a couple of international competitions in taekwondo and kung fu. But that's kind of it about her. You don't really get to see any takedown defense against any real competition. You don't get to see any grappling at all. And on the feet, although she is technical and she is going to be the better striker in this matchup for sure, I just don't think that she can defend the takedowns of Shannon Clark. Shannon Clark is pretty big for 125 pounds. She's very strong, and the way that she wins her fights is actually in the clinch. Now, it can be somewhat of a boring style to watch, but she does make it work a lot, because as soon as she does get into a dominant position in the clinch, she is throwing a lot of knees and a lot of elbows, and that's how she kind of ends up getting her takedowns and ends up putting her opponents in very uncomfortable positions. She's coming off the biggest win of her career at all, again, sorry, against Tiny Lopez, who was a black belt in BJJ, and if you do watch that fight, it is a brutal bulldog submission because she's got her in the bulldog choke, if you're familiar with what it is, and she's like pulling her neck back. Like it's just kind of hard to watch, I'll be honest, even for someone that's watched like a lot of MMA. Like that was a ruthless choke because she's pulling the neck up and choking her out at the same time. Shannon Clark's got a lot of strength. I do think that on the feet she can be very hittable because she does kind of just plod forward and is pretty flat-footed, but that's not her game. She isn't a striker, and I just find it relatively hard to believe that Duben is going to be able to defend takedowns against Clark. So I'm going to go with Clark in this one here, and I do think that she does find a finish on the ground. Most likely a submission. I just have no idea how good Duben is at grappling, and I know that Clark is still pretty good at grappling, so that's the pick. I do think that Clark does find a submission at some point in the fight. And now we have the short notice replacement fight, Austin Bashi fighting against Dorian Ramos. The original matchup was Austin Bashi versus Tommy McMillan, which I know a lot of people were very excited about. There are a lot of people on Bashi, but there are a lot of people on Tommy McMillan as well, and it was going to get very interesting because, well, Tommy McMillan's a very like kind of interesting character in MMA because he was talking a lot, and he was going to make it super fun. And I think that Tommy McMillan could potentially be a star in the UFC, but unfortunately the fight wasn't meant to be. I was gonna go with Bashi in that one, but yeah, it was a very tough fight to watch, and McMillan is massive, 145. And to talk about that, Bashi is now going to be fighting Dorian Ramos at 145 pounds, and I don't really think either of these guys are featherweights, I'll be honest with you, especially with Austin Bashi. I don't really like Austin Bashi at 145 pounds. Now, Bashi isn't 5'3". I think that he probably is like maybe 5'5", maybe 5'6", because Askar was listed at 5'7", and Askar was taller than him, so kind of just based on that, he's not 5'7", but he's a little bit shorter. He's not a featherweight though, I don't think. Now, he did miss weight in that matchup against Askar. Apparently, he struggled to make 135 pounds. What I'm kind of thinking is going to happen is Austin Bashi will get signed to the UFC should he win this matchup, which I do think he does. And then he's going to get a little bit of help maybe from the UFC PI to make that 135 pound weight class. But to talk about Bashi and his skill set, he is a very talented wrestler and grappler. If you do watch his fights, as soon as he gets the takedown, he's working for submissions. On the feet, he's definitely not the most strong striker at all, but he is very fast. I actually was somewhat impressed by how fast he was on the feet against Askar, even though Askar was able to land a couple of decent shots on the feet from range. But he has beaten good guys as well. Like, I do rate a win over Pipe Vargas. All of Pipe Vargas's losses are against good fighters. Askar is a very good fighter on the regional scene as well, and he's also beaten a couple of other decent guys with good records, and these guys with not so good records were just short notice replacements, because he was meant to fight Bellator veteran Ricky Bandejas. I believe Argo Huskic even fought for the PFL at some point, and then Zach Riley stepped in on short notice. So yeah, there's kind of a lot of interesting things about Austin Bashi. He's fought some good guys, but I do think he's a little bit too small for 145 in general. His skill set is good though. He's a very dominant wrestler. He's a very dominant grappler. And now on short notice, he has a mirror matchup. Dorian Ramos, as I just said, I think he's also a small featherweight, and he's also a wrestler. On the feet, he doesn't really have too much to offer, but it doesn't really matter because he's always shooting for takedowns anyway. In fact, I would say that Bashi is probably the better striker out of the two, but Ramos is a grinder. He's got really good cardio, and he's always working in that wrestling. Now, if you do watch a few of his fights, you can see that when Ramos is on top, he looks really good, but he has been submitted a couple of times, well, once, and he has been put in bad positions before as well. I watched his fight against Andrew Queen, and in that fight, Dorian Ramos starts off super hot. 5 seconds into the fight, gets a takedown and kind of controls the first round. But after that, Andrew Quinn starts to actually get a lot of reversals and starts to take the back quite a lot in that matchup. And you can see kind of throughout his whole career, guys have been able to get the back of Dorian Ramos, and I do think that's a little bit of a weakness in his game, because I think if you give Austin Bashi your back, he's probably going to find a submission. It is a mirror matchup, and honestly, I do just think that Austin Bashi is a little bit better everywhere. Ramos has a chance because he does just have such a grinding style, but I don't think we've ever seen any real problems with Bashi's cardio, so I do think we're going to see Bashi win, and only 8 people have picked because the fight was just announced, but I do think that Bashi wins by submission, and I do think that he wins by submission in round 1 or round 2. Now, Will Currie will be fighting against Djorden Santos. In this matchup, it's kind of interesting because I have seen a couple of people picking Djorden Santos as a massive underdog, and I can kind of see it, but I just don't think that he has the style to defeat Will Currie. Will Currie is a pretty hyped up prospect. You know, he's a very, very good submission grappler at middleweight. He probably is one of the better pure grapplers at middleweight that I have seen because you don't really see that style so much in this weight class, but he does have a slight weakness kind of everywhere else. On the feet, he's got really good kicks, but he does still seem to be quite uncomfortable in the striking, and I do think that it is showcased a lot by, I think, his biggest weakness is the fact that he shells up a lot when he's put up under any pressure. Against Mick Stanton, I found it a little bit interesting that no judge scored it for Will Currie. I mean, maybe I'm just an idiot, but I really thought that there's an argument that Will Currie could have won 3 of those rounds. 1, 2, and 5, I think, are the rounds that you could give to Currie potentially, but Stanton won 2, 3, and 4, I believe, on all 3 judges' scorecards. But in round 3 against Mick Stanton, he just kind of folded a lot. You know, Mick Stanton landed a couple big shots, and what Will Currie did was he just kind of like closed up his guard like this and backed up against the cage. And he didn't throw back, he didn't clinch, he didn't try and move out of the way, kind of like a lot of other fighters can do. That was his reaction, was close up and kind of shell away. And then I watched his fight against Wellison Henrique, and Wellison Henrique, you know, he's a veteran, 16 wins, 13 losses. In that fight, Wellison Henrique is a lot smaller than Currie, and he's just bombing away in the boxing, and that's all he's doing. And Will Currie's response to Wellison Henrique's pressure is just to shell up and close up, and he does this throughout the whole fight until he eventually ends up finding the submission. So I do worry a little bit that if Will Currie does fight a guy that's a bit better than Wellison Henrique, but is also an aggressive striker, he's going to struggle a lot because I don't really like that tendency and that reaction that he does do. But aside from that, he's pretty good. His pure grappling is great. He's a really, really good submission grappler. He's proven many, many times that he can win scrambles, and I think that he's going to get put in scrambles in this matchup. And I thought that he did have a pretty good performance against Mick Stanton, who has beaten a lot of good prospects himself. Absolutely dominated Leon Aliyu in their fight. It was end up being a retirement on the stall. I believe the corner actually called it for Aliyu. Apparently Aliyu maybe injured his hand, but yeah, that was a dominant performance. He got the takedown, got on top, and just landed brutal ground and pound throughout the whole fight. And then now he takes on Djorden Santos, who could be a difficult matchup for him, because Djorden Santos, I would actually say, is also a grappler. I would say grappling probably is his best skill set, but he does have very good takedown defense. I think he showcased pretty good takedown defense in every single one of his fights, really. He showed good takedown defense in his only loss, which can be pretty easily found on Fight Pass. But then on YouTube, you can find these ones. This guy, Felipe Martinho, was trying to take him down the whole fight. Santos was able to defend, I believe, every single one but 1 or 2 takedowns, and that was a lot of takedown defense that he managed to rack up. On the feet, I think that he is going to be the better boxer because Djorden Santos really is a boxer. He doesn't really throw too many kicks. Throws a lot of 1-2s. That's probably his best part of his game. Does like to fight from range a bit on the feet. But I don't think that he's going to be aggressive enough on the feet to really like make Will Currie kind of pay for that tendency of just shelling up. And also, I do think that Will Currie will eventually manage to find a position on the ground. Now, I do worry a little bit just because of the fact of how good Santos' takedown defense is, that maybe Currie won't be able to get the takedowns. But I do think that eventually, at some point in the fight, Currie is going to find a good grappling position. I think once he does that, that's kind of where it kind of changes a lot because he's going to land a lot of ground and pound. He's going to be throwing up a lot of submission attempts, and I do think that Will Currie wins. But I do think that minus 400 is very, very wide odds, man, because if you do watch Djorden Santos, he does have better boxing. and he does have really good takedown defense as well. Now, if Will Currie does go out there and just takes him down easily, then Will Currie's offensive wrestling is a lot better than I thought it was. But I think that it's a good matchup for Will Currie, but there is still a chance that the big underdog could win in this matchup, and that's why I'm going to be picking Will Currie to win by submission. And now we move up to the main event, and this fight gave me headaches because Igor Cavalcanti, there's no tape on him, aside from the couple of fights. And I did really try my best to find tape on Igor Cavalcanti because he opened as like a minus 310 on Bet Online right now. I don't know what the odds makers are basing this off of because they must know something that I don't. Because if you look into Igor Cavalcanti, the only fights that you can find on his tape is the amateur fight, which he won in 12 seconds, and then his pro debut, which he won in 27 seconds. He spent most of his career fighting for this promotion called Inside Fighters League, and Inside Fighters League has actually since gone under. They've deleted their YouTube channel, and of course, alongside all of the fights, alongside it, so I couldn't watch Igor Cavalcanti's fights. I did try and use the Wayback Machine to go back in time on the internet and then try and watch them that way, but I don't really know how to use the Wayback Machine, and it didn't really come up with anything that was that useful. So that was a little bit of a shame. But I was able to watch his pro debut, I was able to watch his amateur debut, and I also did go to his Instagram, and I did find highlights of this fight against Gilson Cardoso, but this Gilson Cardoso just kind of looked like an overweight, well, journeyman, which is what he is. But what Igor Cavalcanti brings to the table is as soon as the fight starts, this guy's just going to be coming forward. Unless his style has changed since 2021. But in his fight against Pedro Henrique, the fight starts and Igor Cavalcanti is just swinging bombs, and he ends up knocking him out in 12 seconds. Against Antonio Carlos, the fight starts. Instantly, Igor Cavalcanti runs forward, and he just picks up Antonio Carlos and just slams him down to the ground, lands a couple of ground and pound shots, but then ends up winning by rear naked choke in 27 seconds. And that's all I have to go off. So what I can tell from that is that he's a very aggressive fighter, he's a very fast starter, and it really is no wonder that he has been able to get so many finishes in such quick succession. The problem is he's been able to get so many finishes in such quick succession against pretty poor competition. So it's kind of just hard to tell like how good these guys are. Like this guy, you know, actually wasn't that bad. It's probably the best guy he's fought, to be honest with you. But this guy here was coming off a loss to a guy that was 9-8. All of his wins were against losing opponents, aside from one. And then this guy here, kind of the same sort of story. Won a couple of fights, you know, and then didn't fight for 8 years. And then he fought Igor Cavalcanti to get knocked out in 18 seconds. There's just nothing to go off, aside from the fact that he does have a brown belt in BJJ, according to his Instagram. And if you do search up his name, Igor Cavalcanti, you can see him compete in grappling competition. So I think he's going to be the better grappler in this matchup, but his opponent Seok is pretty good, to be honest with you. I did watch his fight. He is the Sambo World Champion in 2017, and when he did that, he became the first ever Sambo World Champion from South Korea, so that's pretty cool. And then after he did that, he transitioned into MMA to pretty good success, really. He does have a couple of pretty bad losses, I would say. Got knocked out by Sasha Palatnikov, who was in the UFC at one point. Han Seok Kim knocked him out as well, and the way that Han Seok Kim knocked him out was by exposing the biggest weakness in Seok Ko's game. Seok Ko is a very technical striker. I actually think he looks pretty good, but the problem is he doesn't fight the best guys, and then when he did step up in competition against Han Seok Kim, he got knocked out. And what he does as well is he likes to box in the pocket a lot. But he likes to box in the pocket way too much because he will get in the pocket and he will just kind of stay there and then try and throw a couple more shots. Against Han Seok Kim, Han Seok Kim has, you know, been on the road to UFC a couple of times, so you might be familiar with him. But Han Seok Kim was able to just knock him out because Seok Ko closed the distance against him, stood in the pocket for way too long, and Han Seok Kim just kind of cracked him with one massive shot and put him down. Quite a brutal KO loss, actually. But he came back against a couple of guys, and I think that all three of these guys were mismatches, because if you watch the fight, he wins them all easily. This Jae-woon Kim guy gave him a pretty decent fight, I guess, but on the feet, it wasn't close. Seok Ko was just smacking his legs with his great leg kicks, was defending his takedowns pretty well, but as a 5-4 opponent. And then Ryuta Sakurai was 51 years old when he fought him. And yes, he dominated that fight, but Sakurai had nothing for him. He's 51. And then this was also a mismatch against Alwyn Kinkai, and he knocked him out in a minute. So kind of interesting sort of for Seok Ko, as he hasn't fought good guys either. But The reason is I just don't have anything to go off with Igor Cavalcanti, because Igor Cavalcanti could be the next big thing. He could be. But I have never seen him fight aside from 39 seconds of tape, so I don't really have anything to go off. And I'll be honest with you, I just would stay well away from this fight. I don't think that this fight is worth making a bet on. I don't even feel that comfortable making a pick on the fight because I've seen 39 seconds of tape, and that's really it. But I am just going to go with the fighter that I've seen more tape of, and that is Seok. I do think that if he can survive the first round against Evil Cavalcanti, which is going to be a lot easier said than done, because Cavalcanti is just an absolute wild man in there. Cavalcanti, from what I've seen within 39 seconds of tape, is just bombing forward all of the time, shooting takedowns. He's trying to get the submission. He's trying to get the KO. I think he's going to slow down. I don't think there's anyone on this planet that can keep that kind of pressure, keep that kind of pace for 5 minutes. And if Seok can defend takedowns to start with and then just survive the absolute onslaught that Igor Cavalcanti is going to bring on the feet, I think that he can start to take over in the second and the third round. So if this fight gets extended, I think that Seok can go on to win. So I am going to pick Seok to win by late finish over a gassed out Igor Cavalcanti. But I feel like a lot of people are just going to pick Cavalcanti to win in the first round, which is, let's be honest, probably the most likely scenario here. It's just that I have not really had anything to go off with Igor. So I'm going to go with the guy that I've seen more of, and Seok doesn't look that bad. He doesn't. So I'm going to go with him in the matchup. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And with all that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one.